Hello, and welcome to the Techstrong AI podcast. I'm Amanda Razani, and I'm so excited to be here today with Aaron Zukoff. He is the Director of Solutions at Appen. How are you doing today?
Hi, Amanda. I'm doing very well. Thank you. How about yourself?
Doing well, and I'm excited to speak with you about RAG today. But first, can you share a little bit about Appen and what are y'all working on?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Appen is a leading provider of data for the AI lifecycle. Essentially, we've been supporting the kind of AI data needs of companies for the last 27 years through sourcing and collection of data, annotation, and model validation and evaluation, which is a whole lot of things. And we're going to focus in on one aspect of that today.
Wonderful. Yes. So let's get right to it. So that leads us into our topic, which is RAG. And you've mentioned that the human element of RAG is critical when it comes to retrieving data. So can you share a little bit more about that? And then what are some of the problems you see business leaders facing in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So RAG in itself, which stands for retrieval-augmented generation, is essentially a version of an LLM that has kind of more limited knowledge, where that knowledge is essentially your own kind of knowledge base, your own documents that are specific to the company. Right. So generally speaking, an LLM or a kind of base LLM is trained on the internet, right? So its scope of knowledge is very large. And generally speaking, when you're trying to deploy an LLM, either internally, right, which could be helpful for your employees to find information, or even in a customer-facing experience, you want the knowledge of that LLM to be kind of specific to your data, your company. Right, anything that is associated with policies or information that is not general knowledge and not going to be found publicly. So when we think about the human involvement there, it's really going to come down to ensuring that the data itself is the correct data. It's up to date, it is accurate, and it is processed in a way that gives the RAG system the best chance to find the information that best answers the user's prompt. And that can mean a lot of different things. And, organizations have lots of, data sources sporadically, distributed and different contexts involved in those data sets. So ensuring that you have the right humans with the right domain expertise, right, which is going to be, in a lot of cases for RAG, somebody who's an expert in your organization or the data that you're trying to surface to that system, is very much in the loop of that system as it's being built to ensure that it's factual and relevant in its responses. And some of the challenges that we see there are kind of curating that initial data set, right? So instead of saying, hey, here's all of my company's data, go and synthesize this into an answer for me, we find that companies struggle initially to curate that data set to limit its scope based off of the goal of whatever that RAG system is. And we'll dive into some more of that, I think, throughout the conversation.
Yes. So during this process, let's go ahead and go into that a little bit more. Share a little bit more about that, and then what are some of your tips?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think thinking about how a RAG system works, right, is again, you're taking these separate data sources and trying to distill an answer out of them. So depending on the scope of what that RAG system should understand, ensuring that you can get out the relevant pieces from the overall data set, not just what the LLM is pulling out, is going to be important, not only to limit kind of confusion or hallucinations of the model, but also from a cost-saving perspective, right? Generally speaking, LLMs will you'll be charged on your usage of tokens, right? And a token is essentially how many words is it having to synthesize for an answer. So what we see is if you kind of have this, let's call it this more unstructured pool of data, there's going to be less of the LLM is going to be less confident in terms of what it's retrieving, right, and synthesizing into an answer to the end user. So the more that you can limit, the scope of what that RAG is looking at, you're going to have more relevant responses, and it's going to be more cost effective because it's not having to process all of this text data to understand, hey, here are the 10 things I think you're talking about. Ideally, it can say, here's the one thing or three things that I think you want, and then synthesize its answer from that. And there's a few different strategies that can be deployed there. And it really comes down to A, just limiting the size of that pool, and then B is adding some contextual annotations to that data, right, such as metadata about a particular piece of data or a summary about a piece of data that can live alongside of that data in the kind of data center, or you call it a kind of vector DB or embeddings, so that when the LLM is going out and looking for that information, it has, the best chance to kind of match the intent of the user's prompt with a relevant piece of data.
Okay. So, what is your advice to business leaders when it comes to whether or not they should be, or I would think it works in harmony together, but when should they use an LLM versus when should they be using the RAG?
Yeah, so a RAG is essentially just an LLM, but again, you're just kind of limiting its scope, right? So I like to think about it as like, if you're going to a doctor, right, you may have, something that's generally achy, you're going to go see a general practitioner, right? And that's going to be your kind of like base LLM. If you have a more specific issue, my foot really hurts, something along those lines, you're going to go to a specialist, right, about that, because they're going to have more knowledge and kind of a deeper knowledge on that particular subject and will likely assist you. So the foot doctor in that case is going to be the RAG system. And again, it's deeper knowledge on a particular subject in which you want to deploy and leverage that LLM. So they're the same, except, they're just different in terms of the knowledge that they have to be able to give you back a response.
Okay, good to clarify that. So this technology, it's advancing rapidly. What do you see in the future as far as data science, say a year from now or so?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think, we're seeing a lot of improvements in these LLM kind of base intelligence, right? So you'll see a lot about reasoning, right? In terms of being able to justify and step through the thought process of how it came to an answer, right? And if we think about, an LLM is essentially, not dissimilar to essentially a search engine, right? You're asking to go find something, it's pulling responses, but in this case, the LLM is doing the heavy lifting of basically saying, this is what I think is the best result, and then synthesizing that as a single answer, as opposed to, a kind of a page of search results, and you're clicking through, understanding what's relevant or contains the information. So I think, as we see these kind of the base intelligence of these models improve, being able for them to be able to kind of express their reasoning, right, in terms of how they came to a given answer, that is going to be a huge improvement, even in the context of RAG, right? Where, again, like it's not just regurgitating a retrieved piece of data as is, right? But it's kind of stepping through reasoning, understanding the intent of the user's query, as opposed to just following a particular instruction to a T, which again, you might not know the right question to ask. So the more that an LLM can help reason its way to what your intended question was, the better experience you're going to have as an end user.
Awesome. Well, if there was one key takeaway you could leave our audience with today, what would that be?
I would say to really understand how you want these systems to be deployed and ensure that you are limiting the scope of that goal, right? So again, a base LLM is going to be very good at general knowledge type questions. And if you want to deploy a RAG system in a particular area of your business, really not only the data source, but the kind of experience as you're testing and evaluating that system should also be within the context of that goal, right? So be very specific about, how you want to use that LLM and how, your customers, internal or external, are going to use that, and really kind of build the system around that goal, right? And when we see, one thing that we always recommend to customers, right, is because a RAG system has a lot of different components, right? And as you're trying to improve the system, you want to, be very scientific about how you go about that, right? So changing a variable at a time, right? As opposed to, hey, I'm going to change out my base model. I'm going to change out my data source. I'm going to change all these components. Kind of focus in on one piece at a time, and then have a way to measure, right, or benchmark those responses throughout those changes. So we generally will recommend kind of doing an end-to-end evaluation, which will help you establish a kind of a roadmap, right, of which component you should tackle first, and then go ahead and tackle just that component, and then essentially do the end-to-end test again, right? So you're benchmarking these different iterations against essentially a set of golden prompts or scenarios, right? So again, coming back to that concept of understand the goal and the scope of what this system is supposed to be doing. you basically want to have a consistent set of, golden prompts or golden scenarios that you can use to test these systems against, so you can measure, right, ideally objectively as possible, how well it's performing against that goal. And then as you tweak different components of that system, you can come back to that measurement and say, okay, that did have an impact, and it had a very large impact, or it had a small impact. So let's move on to the next component and repeat that cycle.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing your insights with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our audience. Stay tuned because there's more.